Extension Research Center Communications Series. That's a mouthful. It's my pleasure to introduce to you Jarvis DeBerry, who will be talking to us today about writing and publishing opinion pieces in the Times-Picayune. Jarvis has worked for the Times-Picayune since 1997, and he started as a reporter, and he's now an editorial writer and a columnist. He was part of the team of journalists at the newspaper that was awarded a Pulitzer Prize for public service for its coverage of Hurricane Katrina and its aftermath. In 2007, he was awarded first prize for column writing in a contest sponsored by the Louisiana Mississippi Associated Press Managing Editors Association. DeBerry has had poetry published in several anthologies, most recently being The Ringing Ear, Black Poets, Lean South. He lives in New Orleans with his wife, Kelly. So please join me, everyone, in welcoming Jarvis.
Thank you, Lisa, and thank you all for having me. Just by way of brief introduction, let me say that several years ago I would have thought I would probably be where you are and not where I am standing right now. When I went away to college, I went to Washington University in St. Louis, and I actually enrolled in the engineering program. I just graduated from the Mississippi School for Mathematics and Science, which, as the name suggests, has a very heavy focus in math and science. And I went off to college thinking I was either going to be an engineer or a doctor or something scientific, technical, things of that sort. But as all engineering students are required to do at WashU, there is an English proficiency exam that's required. It was required the first weekend after we had arrived on campus. So I think we got there on a Saturday, and the English proficiency exam was scheduled for the next Saturday at 9 a.m. and there had been no classes in the entire time and nothing but frivolity and hanging out and doing foolish stuff for that first orientation week. But, you know, no problem. I can easily pass an English test. My mother is an English teacher, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. You probably know what happened. I flunked the English proficiency exam. And we're not talking about, you know, a high bar here. You know, we're talking, you know, low bar, or so they said. I have my reasons and I have my defense for why I didn't do so well. I will spare you that. But suffice it to say that I was dragged kicking and screaming into English composition. And actually realized that I actually like this more than I like engineering, and I like this more than I like anything else. Hence, I finished Washington University as an English major, and came to the Times-Picayune right after that in 1997. And I have been here ever since. So I just want to say that I'm not unaware of the things that you all do and the things that you may think about on a daily basis. But I'm also here to say that your ability to think analytically and to deal with topics of science and math, et cetera, does not preclude you from the ability to write clear English sentences. And so don't think that being gifted in one particular field automatically makes you incapable of communicating with the public effectively. So I just want to start there. You know, there are a lot of people who write well and say, "Oh, I can't do math." And to you all, that probably sounds absolutely foolish. I mean, it sounds that way to me. Like, you don't want people just to say they can't do math. On the same hand, there's no reason for you all to be in any position where you say that you can't write, or that you can't do this well, because you can't do it if you give time and a little bit of attention it takes. Let's start first with, before we get into this, there are basically two options. If you're trying to get something that's related to your research or something that you study in the newspaper, you have letters and you have what are more commonly known as documents. Letters are, I guess, self-explanatory. They're letters. But I feel the need to say it because there are a lot of people who think that an op-ed or an opinion piece or a column is simply a long letter. And that is not the case. A letter is often a response to something, and that's what it should be. So if you have something, if somebody said that, the Tulane public health program should get less money from some government funder, et cetera, and you're responding to that, that is not a column. That is a letter, and it should be written as such. And making it longer doesn't make it a column. It makes it a long letter that's going to be cut back down to size. So be aware of that. Our editor, Terry Troncalli, wanted me to tell you that letters happen to be one of the best read sections of the paper. She says that with a little annoyance. They're often more read than the things that the professionals on staff write. So don't be so entranced by the bigger space of the columns that you overlook the other side of the page in the letters, because they are very well read and much commented upon. What I would say about letters is keep them brief and to the point, and many of the lessons that we talk about here, many of the things that we talk about here will also apply to letters themselves. But brevity is a virtue, and that's one thing to always remember. Okay, so let's get started. How to say a lot in a few hundred words. Writing opinion pieces that are short, persuasive, and published. I took this title shamelessly, or I perverted this title shamelessly from an essay that I will make reference to shortly, written by a former college English composition teacher whose piece was called How to Say Nothing in 500 Words. And he was talking about his students and how often he gets pieces that say absolutely nothing. And so I decided to pervert that just a little bit. I want to start with a quote from one of my favorite writers who died in 2004, Ralph Wiley. Writing is both easy and difficult. It's not as difficult as composing a symphony, but it's not as easy as listening to it. Anybody should be able to write, although few ever end up writing well. And this is the kind of paradox. We all have been given this toolkit of language, but the ability to put it all together effectively is difficult. And you need to go in with it not knowing that it's not impossible, but it is difficult. It does take a little skill. It's not something that can be easily dashed off, something that's difficult. And this is from the essay, as I told you about, Paul McHenry Roberts, and How to Say Nothing in 5 Words. Can you be expected to make a dull subject interesting? As a matter of fact, this is precisely what you are expected to do. This is the writer's essential task. All subjects, and he says except sex and other, dispute that a little bit, are dull until somebody makes them interesting. The writer's job is to find the argument, the approach, the angle, the wording that will take the reader with you. This is seldom easy, and it is particularly hard in subjects that have been much discussed. And that's true even for professionals. It's true for everybody. Writing doesn't really come easy for anybody who is really concerned about writing well. Just a couple of days ago, I was on Twitter, and someone posted a book review that had been written, I think it was somewhere in the UK. And the writer took great offense at the reviewer's commentary that there were problems with the writing. And the author responds with, "There's nothing wrong with my writing." And it was the most unprofessional and defensive response. And I said that nobody who takes writing seriously would ever say, "There's nothing wrong with my writing." And I said it's kind of an irony that people who are the best writers have this eternal kind of angst over whether or not what they've written is good enough. But people who are the most awful writers think their prose is the best thing that's ever been put to page. So it is hard, but it's not impossible. But it's going to be difficult, as Robert says here. the other hand, being confusing comes quite easily. Clear, effective writing is produced by those who understand that the most readable pieces are often the most difficult to write. And this is what I wanted to talk about specifically, because this is the field that you all are in. Don't take offense. Academics can and often do put forth the world's most awful writing, that which only their colleagues might want to read. And you can see the word that I stress here, might want to read. One of the things I had to learn after I graduated from college, and this is partly what the academy does to people inside the academy. It values ambiguity, and it values obscurity. It values people not being able to access things easily and quickly. And so, I had to go from college where it was hip to say, well, what do you want it to mean? When someone would ask, what does this mean? To having to write for a publication where its meaning had to be clear. And you can't have people asking you what that means. If I'm writing a story about a shooting, for example, or writing a story about a tax proposal, for example, I can't have the reader putting, hand to chin and puzzling over, well, does he mean it this way, or does he mean it this way? Because it could be this, or it could, that's not what we're going for in newspapers. But there's something about the academy, I think, that elevates this sense of confusion to some type of virtue, and it's not. So be clear that when you're writing for a general audience, you're writing for a general audience, and you want people to understand what you do. And you're not writing for other academics. You're not writing for people who are inside. Paul McHenry Roberts says that every subject except sex is naturally dull. But this is something from Masters and Johnson, who were writing about sex. And this is what they wrote. In retrospect, has sufficient information been exchanged to relieve their intense anxieties and to enlist the return of interpersonal communication, there is every reason to believe that in view of their mutual level of sexual responsivity outside of marriage and the definitive residual of interpersonal concern present at the time of therapy, the innate levels of their mutual responsivity could have been concentrated in the marital bed. This is about sex. This is a translation from somebody else. So you can see how you can get so academic and so garbly-gooky that something as simple as this can be turned into something as perverted and crazy as that passage that we just saw. So if I haven't made myself clear yet, what just was on the screen, we'll never see it like in anybody's newspaper. It has such a sentence as this would. Okay. Again, this gets to people. I wanted to talk about this because you all are in an academic institution. And this is a really good book to write, and I'll get more about it later. Far from fostering clarity, the average bureaucracy, corporation, or educational institution rewards obscurity. He does this in ways that make sense only to members of that organization. And Ralph Keyes, who I mentioned there, talks about, in that book, The Courage to Write, how, the same thing I've been talking about, how the academy kind of takes people who may have been able to write well coming into the academy and kind of messes them up a little bit. But one of the things he mentions in this particular book is a study that was conducted. I don't remember when it was. But basically there were a bunch of psychologists and other scientists who listened to a lecture. And then they were asked to grade the lecture, how clear it was. And most people described it as clear and engaging and thoughtful and all these wonderful, wonderful things they said about it, not realizing they had just heard a lecture they didn't understand. It was deliberately incomprehensible. And it said absolutely nothing. And the people in the room pretended that it was clear and engaging, they understood it all well. Wow, how beautifully written it was. And so, I'll read it to you. Dr. Myron L. Fox once spoke to a group of psychiatrists on mathematical game theory as applied to physician education. A tape of his hour-long lecture was later shown to two groups of professionals. On follow-up questionnaires, most who heard his talk judged it clear and stimulating. In fact, Dr. Fox was an actor hired by 3 researchers to speak in double talk. Their goal was to discover if well-educated listeners would admit that they couldn't understand an incomprehensible lecture. None did. So there is this egotism that wants to say, I understand that, and I understood that, when it doesn't, it's not always the case. If you are struggling to understand something that somebody else has written, it could be you, but it probably isn't. Because, I mean, you're fairly smart people, right? So it probably has something to do with writing. And one of the things that he mentions here, he calls it a insider language. The people who are in certain groups speak in a certain way, and they speak in a certain way to signal that they belong to that particular group. There are words that people use because they belong to that particular group. And so your challenge if you're writing for a wide audience is to break that mold. Don't talk the way that you would maybe talk on the 12th floor of this building, or use words that you would only use on the 12th floor of this building. Use the words that you would use if you were standing in a line of houses. And just remember who you're writing